Magdi, it's an honor to have you with us. Thank you very much for accepting and coming to IMD. You are head of operations at Nestle, huge group, one of the biggest in food business in the world, over 80 billion Swiss francs today, pretty impressive. We're talking about deal making, and you have been there long enough to share with us the progress, how things evolved over the time. Can we talk about your vision of deal making? Maybe one of the things would be ethics, fair process, win-win. Can we talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, first, Sameh, thank you for having me.
Thank you for
coming.
coming.
It's a pleasure to come back here. Of course, I am part of the IMD alumni as well. I have attended a couple of courses here, so it's good to be back in this environment,
Our honor.
A student environment.
Our honor.
It's a bit different than the industry environment, of course. Look, I will cover it more from the angle of procurement specifically.
Please do.
Because as head of operations, procurement is with me. And it's very important in our, when you look at our size, of course, commodities and ingredients and a lot of things we buy, it is a sum of money. It's a big sum of money. Sure. So I think, you touched upon a couple of things. Firstly, for me, I would like to think that when you at a table and you want to strike a deal to buy something, I think it should be a consensus. I think both parties need to agree on a line which makes the business and the relationship sustainable for both parties. Because otherwise it's compromises. And compromises usually lead to a win-lose situation. And sometimes in no time, without you knowing, it could be a lose-lose situation. Because when you compromise, you kind of say, I wanted this, but actually I'm forced to do that, and the other party says the same. And it never gives sustainable relationships. And for us to be able, I think, to strike a deal which is sustainable and which is also more around a consensus approach, I think it is extremely important that every party going to the negotiating table, if I may put it this way, has options. Of course, if you go into a discussion and this is your only option, or you have only one or two suppliers and the supplier probably relies a lot on a big group like Nestle, then in this no option situation, usually you strike less good deals. And having options is going to be taking some time, and you need to prepare it over time. For example, in a lot of dealings we do with suppliers, we are very cautious that we are not a big part also of the business of that supplier. Because we want also the supplier to offer us opportunities and offer us choices that the supplier has probably learned over the course of years. And not only dealing with Nestle as a matter of priority, and then we end up having a sort of Nestle solution, rather than being able to benchmark, understand, and get the best of what is out there. So having choices and having options, for me, is one of the key factors in order to have a consensus and in order to have a successful deal.
And coming back to options, and this is probably the basic of what we teach here in negotiation, and I do speak about options. Very often I see in some countries lack of options, monopolies, cartel. How do you deal with that?
Look, you're absolutely right. And also, I believe we were exposed to some of that during the COVID crisis as well, because regardless of the cartels, during a crisis, we had to find business contingency plans and to put them in place very quickly. Although we had a multitude of options, but sometimes a lot of them were kind of down, either because of the lockdown in few countries or because of the infection that has hit this or this site amongst our suppliers. So we had to very quickly put other options on the table. So I think when there is a will, there is a way. So I think if you have in mind choices and options, you could find a way. But specifically in some countries and when you have cartels, I think it depends really on the area. Yes, in some countries you have no alternatives because also you have some challenges around the local currencies and you have lack of cash, lack of foreign currency. So there, with our size, we try to find again some other types of options, how we can help. But also I believe that in those situations you can groom some other options over time. I give you an example. We are an agro-based company, as you know, and in the field of agriculture and agriculture commodities, we wanted to tap more into some of the local resources of the area where the factory is, let's say grains or cereals. In the case of Africa, could be some wheat or maize or things like that. And we kind of worked for a big number of years with local farmers, local people who could not be part of our supplier base. But then eventually after some years of patience, we groomed them, we coached them, we taught them what we need from a quality standard perspective, etc. And they came to the party. It takes time. Grooming alternatives always takes time. And yes, maybe punctually in a certain context, you might find yourself with less options. But I think with the mindset of, no, that's ultimately what we need to do, we will get there. It's probably a bit easier for me to say it because, of course, as you know, we have been around for 150 years. So sustainability is part of our DNA, and we would like to be around for another 150 years. So we have time. Sometimes, in some circumstances, you need to be speedy and fast. But in that case, we have 3-4 years. We could groom a new supply base, and then it will help us in the future. We are doing it also for some technical equipment because it's also driven by some business sense. In some countries, when you import some technical equipment, it's very costly.
Sure.
With the exchange rates. Also, it's far away. So, so if you have some local base, and some local entrepreneurs are really interested to be to be at the table, to be part of that relationship. So I think it's also part of good economical practices to have more than one. As I said, it could be contextual,
Sure.
but we have a way out of that. It takes more time.
No, absolutely. You're building the journey, which also means that probably some suppliers you would keep for 20, 25 years working with the same suppliers?
Yeah, yes, we have those types of suppliers. But it's a very fine balance to strike. Because working with 20, 25 years with a supplier does not mean he or she, as a supplier, would take it for granted. Because this is where then you go back to square one, as I may put it. Because, as I said in the beginning, then you go back to a scenario where actually people feel they should not work harder and be on their toes and work harder, which is not good for business, but it's also not good to improve. You need to be at the forefront of technologies and at the cutting edge of everything you do. So nobody should take us for granted. And by the way, it's the same. We should not be taking other people for granted. So yes, but it's a fine balance.
I understand, but maybe for machinery and equipment, you have like a key account, global key account. So if we're looking at water to be bottled, you don't have 100 suppliers for machines. I think these are molding machines, injection machines.
Correct.
So probably you have a few reliable suppliers following you.
Absolutely.
That's something pretty peculiar.
Absolutely. The base could be smaller, but 3 is more than 1. Sure. Even 2 is better than 1. Yeah. So when I talk about sole supplier or being only with one type of supplier, that I'm talking more, when you have only one. Yeah. But actually, even in those very specific technologies, today you have more than one.
No, that's
and
so
even
true.
What we have done also in our journey, we have kept alive smaller suppliers that might not be taking 80% of the Nestle pie, but let's say the main 2 suppliers will take 60, 65, or 70%. Yeah. But we still have a bit of room for 1 or 2 or 3 additional players.
Absolutely.
That would be happy to take a smaller part because they are not geared up to maybe supply more than that. But at the same time, some of them are very entrepreneurs, and some of them are again at the forefront of technology.
And do you see a shift of supply? Like today, I was just looking at the label market, and I could see when I looked at Africa, lots of label would be shipped out of Lebanon, Egypt, Morocco to Africa. And as I see some African countries are starting producing very high quality labels. So probably there's a shift, and this is interesting because it's making local people work. It's also more cost efficient. Do you see the same shifts as when we do research here?
Yeah,
Theory, of
no,
course.
I think you're right. We see the same shift. Specifically on label, what we
Yeah.
are also doing in some local places where you have difficulty to access maybe what you want is to have 3D printing. You know, if you think of it, that's also available. 3D printing or finishing the printing of the label. Sometimes some of the personalization items, you have the bulk of it, but to personalize, you can finish this
Sure.
on your line. So, yeah, I mean, we did it in some factories as well to complement what is available locally by ourselves, buying some technology that
Sure.
is, I'm not talking about the big,
No.
main printing,
Yeah.
but you could personalize, you could distinguish yourself from others. Today you have a label that can carry your phone name, for example, your first name,
Sure.
or
Sure. No.
and so these things you could do on the line
Sure.
whilst you buy the bulk of it. So I think a combination of what does exist in the country plus what you can do also locally in the factory on our sites is a good combination
Yeah.
to be responding
Sure.
to consumer needs, because ultimately the consumer is the boss, and we
No,
are
that's
doing all this for the consumer to give the best quality at the best possible price.
very true. When we spoke a couple of times, you mentioned the word agility. I think this is something very dear to you.
Yeah.
Within agility, is mobility of your own people through the countries part of that? I mean, somebody who can work in Africa, in the Middle East, but also in Europe and the US. This is becoming a scarce resource to have people who are so mobile and who are dealer-wheelers, not on the negative side of it, but I mean, they know how to adapt to culture. How do you manage that?
I think you're right. Agility is about adaptation, is about speed as well. Before I go to people, maybe allow me one word about also how we need to meet decisions fast. And the part also of agility when we spoke is to also what we ask from our suppliers is a quick adaptation to what we bring to them. But also we need to, of course, play the game ourselves, meaning fast decision making within our company. And sometimes it's a challenge seen from outside. To be honest, a big company like Nestle, you need a lot of alignment, you need to spend a lot of time. And it's interesting, a comment that comes across from people around us, from outside Nestle, is to say, look, you guys are big, we know it takes time by the time you align, but once you align, you really move very fast.
Yeah.
So yes, we need to align because we have gone through a lot of challenges in our lives and in our Nestle lives, and we have learned a lot.
Yeah.
So integrating all those learnings is also key. And that's part of having many players sometimes around the table before a major decision could be met. But hopefully it's the right one, and then we execute it in a very fast way. So this agility piece is also important in our discussion and relationship with suppliers. But to your point about people, you know, it is not so easy to find people that can adapt to many cultures. So, and I think now the situation is evolving in a sense. You need some cultural intelligence. So CQ is important, EQ is important, showing empathy for people, emotional intelligence. So you don't need only to be intelligent. So IQ by itself and alone is not enough.
Yeah.
So you need all the other attributes. You only also need a family to be agile, because he or she, they have a partner, they have a husband or a wife, and sometimes they have kids, and the whole family needs to show flexibility and agility. And today is becoming more difficult, because when I started my career in Nestle, which was 30 years ago, you know, it was like a bit the commando approach. We were excited to go to many countries, and you pack your suitcase and you go. But my wife had to sacrifice her career, for example, to follow me. Today is becoming more difficult. More than 80% of a family both have income. You have dual careers. And of course, you have children that need to change schools, etc.
Sure.
So it's becoming more of a challenge. So that type of agility is probably less than before, and it's probably less required, because those were the days when we had to develop a business. We go with a pioneering spirit, and we develop a business and then it's taken over by local people. Today we have spent a lot of time and efforts in developing local people globally with the same types of standards. That's why, you know, we use also Riverain as a school, but we also use our own facilities, you know, Riverain, our own facilities, but we use IMD as well as a school. And I feel that we have a very good standard. So we have excellent people that are local. Most of our talents are local.
That's for sure.
Our so-called expats pool, we're talking below 1,000 people.
Yes,
out of a company of 300,000 people. So yeah, that type of agility is probably less required. It's more agility in learning new things. Whilst you maybe are local, you get exposed to new things every day, and you could have missions a bit elsewhere to discover the Nestle world. So it's another way to implement agility and to adapt to local circumstances.
Very interesting. I was speaking to someone last week, and I said I'm meeting a gentleman from Nestle, and he said, you know, Nestle is like une machine de guerre, a war machine. It takes time to get aligned, but once it's aligned, boom, it goes, and it goes fast, it goes deep, and results are pretty amazing. And it's almost a school of business, Nestle itself. So I'm bridging what you're telling me with what I've heard. I would like to speak, if you allow me, about ethics in business. It's becoming more and more important for people like us, academic. People ask about compliance, so this is very legal. I'm much more interested in ethics, which means that you can really squeeze people, but on the long term, maybe this is not your best choice, because it's a win-win type of mindset. Would you like to share something about ethics and maybe link it to social capital, your capability just to be nice, straightforward, honest to suppliers? Can we combine those two together and maybe hear from you?
Absolutely. I think I agree 100% with what you said. A company like us, this is our blood. This is our bread and butter, you know, compliance and ethics. We say things and truthful to what we say. Be compliant with what we said ourselves, but also, of course, be compliant with all the rules and regulations out there. We operate in 187 countries, so you can imagine also the diversity of rules and regulations we need to comply to. So that we cannot do anything or think of or dream of doing any business without those basic principles, because the damage to our brand, the damage to our reputation, to our name, to our company, to our people is just huge. So this is not even to be thought of. And we are looking also, it's part of, this is part of human rights, ethics, and all that, and having fair negotiations is also part of our sustainability. As I said earlier, we are not a touch and go company, you know. Other smaller companies could afford maybe to be touch and go and to strike a nice deal, but then the next deal is rubbish. So it doesn't work like this with Nestle. We need to win in a win-win situation nearly every time. And if you look at farmers, we have been working a lot with farmers, although we do not own farmers, but we work directly with nearly 1 million farmers, a bit below 1 million farmers, directly. Of course, indirectly, we work with many more farmers, but directly, where if we need to hold hands, we hold hands. And if we need to groom them and coach them to increase their yield, their productivity, also for them to reduce their environmental impact, these are the things we do. We have recently also, when it comes to cocoa, we are also part of the companies which have voiced their support to Ghana and Ivory Coast and the living income differential, because we feel that these are things that we need to be part of. So this is a long journey over years, and you know, we do it in a very sustainable way. I'll give you another example. Deforestation in sustainability. We have committed to deforestation, 100% deforestation by 2020. Well, by 2020, we'll be around 90% plus. We'll get to 100% in a couple of years. Why do we have a delay? Because simply part of our supplier base are smallholder farmers. And we thought that's not right because of a commitment which is important for climate change, no deforestation. But we thought it was not right and good for the livelihoods of those farmers to cut them out completely from our supply chain. So we have about 15-20% that are smallholder farmers. They need more time. we need to hold hands longer, and we decided to delay a bit our journey on no deforestation by a couple of years, simply to try our best to take everybody on board. And I think this is part of, there is a commitment out there which is very important, deforestation, but what's more important for us? So this is again the fine balance that you need to strike. So it's just a couple of examples to show you how much business ethics, how much sustainable farming as an example, but other things, how much livelihood of our farmers, because they are part of our supply chain. If they have no good livelihood, we will not have any more supply.
You'll end up by losing.
So it's all part of this win-win mentality. It's good for the business, good for the farmers. And this is in line, you might have heard of that, the concept of creating shared value. We feel for a business to be sustainable, we need to kind of have a value that we create, but which is shared. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So all these are at the core of our business principles.
You might have heard, I'm not sure, that IMD is running a chair on sustainability, and this very, I would say, savvy balance between big ideas, commitment, and still not crush small farmers saying, you know, you didn't meet the timeline 2020, you're out of this room. No, you're trying to be flexible, still keep your commitment, and that's very interesting for people like us when we step back and reflect and research on how you can be both 100% committed but still leave some flexibility, and psychologists would call that sense making.
Yes.
We have some
pragmatism.
Exactly.
What comes first? The livelihood of somebody or a commitment of a company?
That's right. Pragmatic, and this is principled negotiation. My last question is, and probably for my part of research, with the most importance about social capital. How do you develop that? I've seen a lot in countries where there is no system, where information is not available. Smart negotiator and deal makers would typically go and be kind to people they don't need, because they know that it's a wheel. Maybe today you don't need me, I don't need you, but maybe tomorrow we'll need each other. And the best time to build the social capital is not when you need people, because it sounds fake and everybody could feel it and smell it. So probably is to reach out to people you don't need when you are in a position of strength and stability yourself. Do you agree? Do you practice any of those?
No, absolutely. I mean, the analogy I always take is very simple. It's like your neighbor, you know. If you only knock on the door of your neighbor when you need something from the neighbor, then at some point in time he will get nervous and he will tell you, you have never showed up in good days.
Yeah.
So I think in sunny days, this is part of what we do.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is why we probably are successful as much as we are. Some of our suppliers during the COVID crisis, we helped them. We helped them with local authorities to get the necessary permits to be able to open again, because they were part of our food chain. So if you help somebody in times of crisis without really that somebody asking you for anything, that's also part of building those relationships. And in times of normal business, when you have no crisis on both sides, that's part of what we do. Exchange best practices, for example, allowing, in my area of expertise, allowing suppliers to come and if they want to test something on the machine, and then we try to say, okay, if that works, if it's good for us, then let's sit around the table. So I think it's partnership. We see it as partnership. Today we are in a period where we are developing with a lot of small companies, but also bigger ones, the new packaging of the future, because we have made a commitment to be 100% by 2025 reusable or recyclable packaging. We have created the Institute for Packaging in Verger-les-Blancs here in Switzerland with 54 PhDs. They are working with companies of various sizes to develop something. Some of that might not land anywhere, some of it might land.
Sure.
But all our ecosystem really strongly feels that we are there for the outcome and not necessarily, as you said earlier, you're not there, you don't perform this. Of course, there are key performance in it, but not cut completely. So all this mentality, all this work together with the ecosystem is part of the same mentality, same mindset, that we work to move things forward, and a lot of that will be good for our business, but some of it will only be good for the communities.
Sure.
And we care for that. In waters as well, we help communities reduce their water usage. We have done water filtration plants where we decided to give some water around our sites in a lot of communities and make clean water available, because we have the technology, because we know how. So we come in with this angle. We know how to do it. Let us show you, the municipality in some places, let us show you how we do that. The supplier is a bit the same. Usually the supplier need it less because, of course, they have their own expertise, they have their own, I would say, experts, and sometimes we do rely on them more than they rely on us for these things. But the spirit is a spirit of, let's work together, let's create, share the value that is created together, because, again, in times of crisis, this time we helped some suppliers. Some other time, some suppliers will help us in the next crisis. We hope there will be no next crisis, but, in a lot of places, crises are ongoing, whether they are political, whether they are social, a huge level of unemployment. Now, because of the crisis, we made it very clear during the COVID crisis that number one is safety and health of our employees. Number two is ensuring supply. And number three is lending a helping hand to communities. So part of also, safety and health of our employees was also to take care of them and their families, to look at do we need to give them some specific cash vouchers, do we need to give them meal voucher, transportation vouchers, etc. And that helps indirectly the community. We behave the same with our suppliers. The example I mentioned, that we helped them to get the permit out of the lockdown, because of course they are part of our supplier base. So I think that was the mentality of Nestle for many, many years, and we believe in it. It's not philanthropy, and that's the basic difference. It's really creating value together. How can we share it, and how can we move forward? And that doesn't happen if it's only wheeler-dealer type of approach.
Yeah, greenwash type.
If it's a greed story, if it's, to your point, doing some deal makings only in times where you need them, because, this will fly once, probably twice.
But not sustainable.
And then the third time it will break and go down. So it's not sustainable. And as I said earlier, we want to stay around for another 150 years. So all the elements of sustainability, whether it is sustainability in social capital, whether it is sustainability in the environment, whether it is sustainability in the agro base we tap our commodities from, etc., whether it is our talent, we touched upon that, and developing the people, local talent throughout the world. All this makes our business sustainable and makes our brands live longer, and that's what we are here for. So we have re-articulated recently our sense of purpose, and we talked about enhancing quality of life and contributing to a healthier future. So how can we enhance quality of life and contribute to a healthier future if you are not sustainable from a business standpoint? So all the elements is like a puzzle I mentioned earlier are key for the sustainability of our business. And after all, as you know, our signature is good food, good life. So again, how can we be the good food, good life company
if it's not sustainable?
If it's not sustainable, without a good planet, without good social capital, without good talent, without all of what we discussed earlier. So it's kind of important for our own survival as well.
Yeah. I have three small questions to end up with, and I believe they're almost part of one big question. And I'll put them together, and you decide how you want to deal with them. I'm not sure Nestlé is a Swiss company, because it is 100% Swiss. Still, I feel it's 100% global. And you mentioned the fact that you are encouraging local people, local farmers, and so on. My second thing, which goes with, how does a company like Nestlé, which is known to hire the best people, how can Nestlé keep people for so long? I mean, your turnover in personnel is pretty low. What's the secret? What do you do to keep those people happy, with a sense of purpose? And it shows when we deal with somebody from Nestle, they convince us because they're convinced themselves. So is it a Swiss company? Does the brand impact the quality of people you hire and the supplier? And my last question is, some of us are gifted in networks and social capital. Can we teach it to people working for us? Or we're born with it, we got it from our families, the context, and then when you go to a company with lots of processes, we have to follow. So really, lots of things in one question, and I'm sorry about the confusion, but they all come to my mind one way.
No, I think these are brilliant questions. In a sense, they are not confusing. They are all linked to the same topic, finally, and you're absolutely right. So we are an international company based in Switzerland. It would not be right to say we are a Swiss company. In a sense, today, if you look at our shareholder base, yes, we have a lot of shareholders that are Swiss-based, but we have shareholders that are in all parts of the world. So that's one, from a shareholder perspective. From a brand perspective, if you look at brands, it's interesting. I'll tell you a little story. When I started my job in Malaysia, I went to the airport. I arrived for the first time, and then the lady at the customs, asked me, "What are you? Why are you coming?" I said, "I'm coming because I want to start my new job in Nestle." Maybe it was my pronunciation, I don't know, but she did not get it. And then there is a big brand in Malaysia called Milo. And I said, "Milo." "Oh, Milo." She understood. A lot of people think that all those brands actually are local.
Oh.
Because indeed, they have been, some of them have either been born locally or have been groomed locally. So we are, I would think, a global company. It's a global company, but very localized. We have local people. To our discussion earlier about experts, less than 1,000 out of a company of 300,000 people. Local talent, local people, local brands sometimes. Yes, we have the so-called big brands, billionaire brands that cut across. But we have a lot also of local brands. From a shareholding perspective, from a brand perspective, from an employee perspective, we are an international company. When you come to our headquarters in Vevey in Switzerland, you hear, I don't know, maybe 100 languages in the corridors, and you have probably more than at least 100 nationalities. So yes, from a people perspective also, it is an international company. From a stakeholder perspective, all our stakeholders, all our ecosystem, we talked about farmers, we talked about suppliers in various countries. These are local business people. There are, of course, big companies, as we covered, big suppliers, but we have also very local suppliers. So from all angles, it is a truly global, local company, but based in Switzerland. And we are very proud and we are very happy. We are truthful and faithful to our hub. We are based in Switzerland. But that's a bit the best to define Nestlé. Now, how can we keep that glue, maybe, that same mindset? I think some of it is linked to what we discussed earlier. It takes time to align. We have our own ways and means inside the company, but once it's aligned inside the company, it's very well, communicated. When we articulated this sense of purpose, we put around it new words, which I just described. It was then completely, communicated throughout the Nestle world. And over years, that has kind of created what we could call the Nestle culture. And that Nestle culture, and it's very simple. If you look at our values, we have not articulated a big booklet to talk about our values, because that's where it starts. You need to find something simple that people can identify themselves with. We haven't talked about pages and pages. We have articulated our values around respect. One word. We said respect, for example, for our own employees. That's part of what I just described. Diversity, inclusion, different nationalities, different ethnicities, equal chances, development of people. These are signs of respect to our own people. Respect to the consumer. That's quality. This is food safety and quality of the products. Respect to future generations. This is all our work on environmental sustainability and all what we covered earlier. So a simple word like respect, people identify themselves with that. And that's kind of a non-negotiable value. And that will not change with previous CEOs, future CEOs, etc. That is something that everybody lives and breathes. And that contributes to this culture. The culture can evolve over time, of course. But that's how...
And it should.
It should evolve over time. But, you know, the glue, the value, the ethnic part, the ethical part, that you were talking about, that is the glue. So simple things, I think, powerful alignment methods and broad communication. And we live it. You know, as employees, we live it. We truly... practice it. And I think throughout my career, people, of course, left us. You say we have a low turnover. You're right. But I think the few people who left us, a big majority of them, when you talk to them afterwards, they said, you know, we miss something that, you know, this way of wording things, this way of living things, as opposed to maybe sometimes they join companies where they are told, you know what, get it done at all costs or get it done by all means.
Yeah.
We are not like that.
Luckily.
And we take pride in not being like that. We take pride in succeeding with the way we do it. So, yeah, I'm a bit biased, of course, because I'm a product of the big house. But I think you said it, not me, that when you talk to a lot of Nestle people, they have the same type of approach.
Sure.
And I'm not sure if it answers your question, but it's one angle to try and answer your question.
It does, but my last point was gonna close the loop. Is can we teach other people of our teams to be sensitive to networking? Sometimes I see people on the coffee machine. They will take the time to ask you how you're doing, your kids, and they remember small personal details. And maybe a year or two down the road, they still remember, and they would ask you, did your son got admitted to school in the US? Did your daughter find a job and your parents are okay and so forth? I think we're born a little bit with it. We got it from our families and the context in which we grew up. But can we teach it to other people, to our team members?
I think what we can highlight to our people is the importance of showing empathy and really caring genuinely for, if you ask a question about family and background and also, you know, how are you today? We just went through COVID. Is your family safe? I made it a point to start asking those questions before talking about the business. How are you? Are you safe? Of course, I'm not sure you can really teach it 100%. Some people are better at it. But provided they show empathy in a different way, that's what we expect. But I think, and the caring part can be done a bit differently. I think it would be wrong to think that we will put everybody under the same template, because, of course, the background is different.
We're human beings.
The human beings are totally different. And I think they will come across then as not being genuine. I think what's important is that everybody remains genuine to his or her culture, authentic. Because lack of authenticity, you can see it.
It's a drawback. Yeah.
It's a drawback. You can see it. So whilst keeping that, because it's important, building on the strong points of people, I think I'm convinced that everybody has strong points and everybody has a different way to operate.
Yeah.
And we should make sure that they use the strong points in the way they operate, provided, of course, you know, this caring aspect is there, and this we are, of course, want to have outcomes and performance, but the performance is coming through the caring. It's not contradictory. Coming through taking care of our people.
And respect.
The same way we take care of our brands and respect.
Magdi, it was a true honor to have you with us. Lots of insights. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to share this once approved with our participants. I'll hope they will benefit from it, and I hope I will see you not in 150 years, but hopefully before.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you for
Thank
having
you
me.
once more for coming, taking the time and sharing with us your wisdom and experience. Much appreciated.
Thank you,
very
Sameh.
much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.